What's up, everybody? Welcome back into our episode of the Lawyer You Know podcast. And this week, we've got my dad coming on. We've already talked about the verdict, but we haven't talked about any of the aftermath. So I'm going to ask him about the juror interviews, what he thinks about the fact that the jurors are giving all these interviews, what can we learn from them as lawyers and as society, and what you should and shouldn't do reacting to and thinking about what the jurors did back there. I'm going to ask him about the lawyer statements made and interviews. Did anybody make a misstep? What's the difference between prosecutors making statements versus defense attorneys making statements? And what he thinks about doing the rounds and the car wash of all the interviews that defense attorneys do. We're also going to talk about some of the witnesses that came out and made statements. Some witnesses that did testify at trial, others that didn't. McCabe's, Alberts, Proctor, etc. What he thinks about all of this aftermath, about after a big verdict that the world was watching. What can we learn from it? Is it appropriate? Is it not? And at the end, I'm going to show him a little video of Judge Beverly Cannone or her sister potentially at the airport flying out and what she had to say and how judges can deal with verdicts like this and potentially questions coming from the media. So we'll talk about all that and more. Let's get to it. It was a long intro because there's just so many interviews and things happening after this verdict. And a couple of the jurors and people have gone on Good Morning America and, mainstream media, but the vast majority of these people involved and even potential witnesses that didn't actually testify at the trial, like Michael Easter has gone on my show and other shows talking YouTube channels, podcasts. A lot of the jurors have gone on YouTube channel podcasts. Lawyers have gone on YouTube channels and podcasts. What do you think about the fact that so many of these witnesses and people involved are choosing to do it on a longer forum with an hour and a half, 2-hour discussion to really break things down versus the 5, 6, 7 minutes that we see on mainstream media, and just the way things are continuing to trend in that direction when it comes to high profile interviews and discussions?
Well, you said it, trend. There is a powerful, it's powerful what goes on in social media. How many presidential candidates would have gone on YouTube 4 years ago or 8 years ago? Now it's almost essential that they go on YouTube, and they reach millions of people by going on YouTube, millions of voters. So what's happened is the mainstream media is losing power and social media is gaining power. And it's obvious. The shift is obvious.
Yeah, and I think it's also cool because if they pick mainstream media, you basically have one shot at it. Whoever the host is, whether you like them or not, whether you know them or not, you're going to watch that show. Social media, YouTube's podcast, whatever it is, they may go on multiple ones, and you may like one host better than the other, or you may like the way somebody asks questions better than the other, and you can watch them on that one. Or you can get different vibes and different sides from them every additional interview they do, and that's kind of cool versus just, again, one shot, that's it, very buttoned up, very corporate feeling sometimes. There's still a place for them, and it's still cool, and we watched some of the jurors give interviews on some of there, and they were good interviews, they were informative, and we learned a lot from them, but it definitely is a different vibe, I think.
Well, and the other thing too is, keep in mind, the mainstream, they've got a lot of advertising costs. So they have segments. This is a 5-minute segment. This is an 8-minute segment. And that's it. That news story is an 8-minute segment. Whereas if you go on social media, you could be on there for an hour or an hour and a half or 8 hours.
Your real personality can come out. People can really get to know you on these types of shows, I think, and it's kind of cool. I mean, it's definitely a different element, especially for, political candidates, like you said. So we'll start out talking about the jurors. And I want to talk individually about them, what you thought about each of their interviews, but generally speaking, what are your thoughts on jurors giving interviews post-verdict?
I think it's fine. I think that it's a good idea. One of the things that, I've been litigating for a long time. I take a lot of things for granted when I do jury selection and what jurors are going to do. Young lawyers really should watch these because they're going to learn so much about the way jurors think. I kind of do it instinctively, so I probably don't verbalize it as much as I should, what I think about jurors as I'm selecting them. But they've got to learn what these jurors are thinking and how they think. And they don't think like we lawyers think. That's another thing too, is we lawyers think we're so smart. They don't think like we think. So these jury interviews, what an education it is, again, especially for a young lawyer. There are some in this case that there's a ton of information for jury selection and how juries conduct themselves for a young lawyer to really take note of.
Yeah, I think they're the most educational part because at the end of the day, everybody wants a judge to say, "Oh, you did a great closing argument," or "You handled yourself amazingly," or opposing counsel to say, "Wow, that was a really good battle." But at the end of the day, if the judge thinks I was boring and opposing counsel thinks I was easy to go up against, but the jury gives me the verdict I want, I'll take that every day of the week. So it's really this is our audience. These are the people we care about. So when they tell you what they think and what they find important, that's the best education you can get as a trial lawyer. And they said a lot. They had a lot to say. So where do you want to start with these jury interviews?
Well, you can. I guess we can start with the jury foreman.
Sure.
Because I think that there were some tidbits. He was not the longest interview. Juror number 11, Ms. Pardo, was the longest. She's done quite a bit. But
Yeah.
the jury foreman really had some interesting things to say because there's a lot of things you can learn when selecting a jury from that jury foreman. The jury foreman was an African American. He brings that with him into the jury room. Like every other juror, you bring your life experiences in with you. And one of the first things he said in that interview was, they didn't go in the house. I guarantee you, if it was my house, they would have gone in and they would have searched that house. So here again, life experience. He was offended by the fact that they didn't go into that house, and he really noted the fact they didn't go in that house and conduct a search. So that's something to keep in mind when you're selecting that jury, that they're going to bring a life experience in with them. He also absolutely flat out, no collision. He bought the defense argument, no collision, no collision, no collision, and he actually said that. The other thing, again, there are many little tidbits, was the hoodie. We probably thought, okay, the hoodie was a mistake. It looked bad. To him, that hoodie was an example of prosecutorial misconduct. He took that really serious, that they were trying to slip this hoodie in, those holes in the hoodie, and they were trying to slip that bit of evidence in to fool the jury. And he really, really concentrated on that in his interview. He thought the prosecution played games, and so he had a bad opinion of the prosecutors by the time that this was over. The other thing that he talked about was the DUI, and I forget, what do they call OUI in the Commonwealth? He said the reason that was proved beyond a reasonable doubt, her testimony, we counted the drinks, so obviously from videos, those kinds of things, and it was the only solid verdict that we could come up with. Everything else had holes, everything else was speculation. Everything else was trying to fit a square peg basically into a round hole. But he really believed that the DUI was proved by counting the drinks and her testimony. So I thought that was key, that her testimony led to that, but her video testimony. But her video testimony did not lead to any other issues with regards to the other charges, just to that one.
Yeah, I think one of the other cool things about him was they don't vote or pick their own foreman. When that happens, usually it's the natural leader, somebody with a certain kind of personality. He seemed pretty stoic. He seemed like he had probably a pretty strong personality, but he didn't seem like the most boisterous, outgoing. We found out that another one of these jurors had a legal background, was a lawyer in Brazil. Maybe she would have been more naturally the foreperson. Who knows? But he gets picked as the foreman, and he said a lot of people came in with kind of personal thoughts and feelings that we had to get around and really dig in and talk about the evidence and reasonable doubt and what did they prove. And I like to see somebody that's a foreman taking their position seriously, focusing in the jury, making sure they're doing what a jury should be doing, and not just doing what a lot of people want to do is, I feel like she's guilty. I kind of think she's guilty. I feel bad for the O'Keefe family, which I think every single one of these jurors did. But he did a really good job of focusing on what their job was to do. And again, that's somebody that the judge selected as the foreman, which I thought was interesting.
He also said he made sure everybody had the right to speak, and everybody got to speak their mind and speak and talk as long as they wanted to. And then that's the job of a foreman. So you're right about him taking it seriously. He really said, I wanted to make sure everybody had that right to speak. He also said that we started to go down rabbit holes that the prosecution or the evidence, and he said we had to stop ourselves because he thought that the evidence sometimes put them into going in an area that really didn't matter. And so they had to bring themselves back to what really did matter. So I thought it was interesting that he recognized the rabbit holes that were created during the course of the trial. The other thing is he was asked about innocence versus not guilty by reasonable doubt. And he was convinced the word was innocent for him. She was absolutely innocent. And that seemed to be kind of a theme.
Big time.
Or at least the ones that answered that. Some didn't answer that question. But the ones that did answer the question, the theme was innocent versus just not proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, I thought that was a big deal. And then also another common theme and something that he shared in was he hopes they do reopen the investigation or do something to get justice for John O'Keefe because they're not finding that justice with Karen Reed hitting him with the Lexus because the evidence just does not support that. He was pretty clear on that.
And he specifically talked about the FBI. Mm-hmm. That he said, I hope the FBI opens an investigation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Where do you want to go next?
We can go to, if you want to go to 11 next, because sure. She definitely.
She's the Brazilian lawyer.
Yes, Ms. Pardo. And she was really interesting because she had long interviews.
Oh, yeah. A lot of interviews, yeah.
Yeah. And she really went into detail about what she thought. For instance, she absolutely believed that a dog caused the injuries. That she felt bad, obviously, for the victim and the victim's family, and she wanted to hear from the Alberts and Higgins. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I think we can look at is she might be saying it, but she's not the only one. If she says it, I guarantee you that there was a group in that jury room that wanted to hear the same thing. She just now was just voicing her opinion. So I think the jury wanted to hear from the Alberts and the Higgins. They were disappointed they didn't. Interestingly enough, this goes to show you how lawyers and people on the outside view things so differently. We were sitting there agonizing about Proctor. And we were saying, oh, should we call Proctor? Should they not call Proctor? All the mental anguish that went into that. Calling Proctor didn't make a hoot to her. She said, we had everything we needed to know about Proctor or from Proctor. I didn't care if they called Proctor or not. I mean, let's say, he's not, she thinks the reason he wasn't called was maybe because he wasn't an officer anymore. And that was the reason that they didn't call him. So the fact
I think that's something Hank Brennan wanted them to think. Like, I think that's a win for Hank Brennan. If they're sitting back there being like, oh, obviously they're not going to call him. He's not a cop anymore. That's good for Hank Brennan. Listen, yes. That's one thing that's hard for me to believe that any juror wouldn't have hated him even more if they would have called him. Like it is, I get it. And they didn't need it and they win and every decision they made is correct. But man, what juror is going to be like, oh, I do like Proctor more after putting him on the stand? I mean, we'll get to his interviews eventually, but that guy can't help himself.
No, he can't. And he doesn't come across well no matter what he does.
Exactly.
But she was not concerned that Proctor, she was more concerned about the Alberts and the Higgins not being called. She thought that was a mistake.
Summertime is here and it's incredibly hot in Florida and busy. We're traveling, doing all sorts of things. Schedules are changing, camps, doing different things with our kids, and sleep can become difficult. When the routine changes, that can negatively affect my sleep, at least. And that's where our sponsor, Dream, comes in. And it's got to be part of my sleep routine for me to take those capsules to ensure I get a good night's sleep. But what's kind of cool is they came out with this iced cherry berry Dream. And I tried it. Tastes great. I'm still more of a capsule guy myself, but my wife loves it. She already had her kind of sleepy time mocktail that she did. And I was like, try this. She did. She approves. And now that's part of her routine this summer. So while it can be normal for some people to sleep worse in the summer, don't make that your routine. Late nights, light evenings, socializing, travel, and more can really affect your sleep. Dream helps you get back on track and creates a nightly ritual that you can look forward to. So you can shop Beam's 4th of July sale and get up to 40% off site-wide with code LYK at checkout. It's limited time only, so don't miss out. It's LYK at checkout for 40% off site-wide.
She also explained one of the things we questioned is why the jurors switched seats. Remember we were talking about that, and we all had these reasons. And
Mhm. And some people said they didn't, so I thought it was an interesting confirmation.
yeah, so the reason is because one juror couldn't hear, and
Mhm.
they switched to accommodate a juror to be able to make her hear better. So I thought that was really pretty good. She was 90% convinced about not guilty when the Commonwealth rested, which I thought was also interesting, is that she was not totally convinced yet. And she also thought when her question went after Bello, the medical examiner, testified, she
Mhm.
said, I asked myself the question, why are we here? That, to her, Bello just
Yeah.
totally wrapped up the case. It was over.
I think that might have been
So
the title of my video when Bella was testifying. I don't know. I
what?
know the title of one of my videos is "Why Are We
Oh,
Here?" and I think it might have been after Squirty Bello at some point. That was the title of the episode. So yeah, I mean
yeah.
that's that's a lawyer's brain looking at it, understanding the burden, and being like, this makes no sense. And the defense absolutely. I'm not sure how appropriate. Did you have an issue with the defense? You're probably going to say no, but the defense almost making the ultimate issue out of Scorty Bello, like she was a juror and had already made the decision, which she's not in the same position as a juror, but they really made that so clear. And I think it was really effective. I'm not sure how appropriate it was, but what do you think?
I think it was just fine.
I'm sure you do.
I think it was just fine.
Yeah.
She also talked about the jurors. Again, she was careful to say the jurors didn't talk to each other about the case before they went into deliberations. But she did mention a lot of winks and nods that the jurors would have toward each other. That they'd make faces,
Yeah.
or they would laugh, or their expressions. And one of the things she talked about is they kind of looked at each other when the Commonwealth rested, because they were all surprised that was it. That was the end of the Commonwealth's case.
Well, and that's why we all looked at each other like that when they had no rebuttal. We weren't really that surprised when they rested because we were all thinking, oh, they're going to have a big rebuttal. They're going to have a bunch of witnesses come on rebuttal. They're not even close to done. That's what I was telling. If you would have told me there's no rebuttal coming and they would have rested, I would have felt the same way as the jury. I would have been shocked it was it.
So they were surprised. Again, they didn't talk,
Yeah.
but they looked at each other.
Mhm.
Uh, Now, on the defense side, again, lawyers, we look at it sometimes and we forget. Jurors don't look at it and see it the same way we do. Um, she obviously criticized Dever. I
Yeah.
don't know, Dever. She criticized Dever, unprofessional it is. However, Dever played a part in her decision because of how bad Dever was and
Mhm.
how she changed her testimony. So she thought Dever was a key witness. We thought, oh, what a surprise! This is not something that Jackson was expecting. But she looked at it as a positive for the
Oh yeah,
defense.
and that was another common theme. A lot of the jurors felt like Dever was really, really important. Just something that I disagreed with and was wrong, right?
Right,
Because all
right.
that matters is how the jurors look at it and what they think about it, and that's why such a great learning experience. Also, what's also interesting about juror number 11 is she's given so many interviews. I think you've seen some that I haven't seen, because there's just so much out there that I have seen from her, and she's getting attacked online a lot from people that support the other side, I guess, or whatever it may be. Have you seen any of that?
I have not seen the attacks, but I've got to tell you, in the last couple of days, what I've done, and I didn't do this during the trial. During the
Mhm.
trial, you're about the only one I listened to.
Um,
But I went on some other, and I won't say what other,
okay.
YouTubes and things I looked at. I was surprised to see how hateful some of them were about the jury verdict, that they were just outraged
Mhm.
that she was found not guilty. They were outraged. They don't see how the jury could have possibly found her not guilty. The evidence was clear. Obviously, the jurors were not smart enough to figure out the evidence. I mean, that's what some of them said.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that going around now too. But she
Yeah.
specifically, because she's been so vocal and out there, has I think gotten the most hate
Oh,
that
I haven't
I've
seen that.
of any
Yeah.
of the jurors. What do you think about the people that go out there and attack jurors after doing their duty and giving their verdict and moving on?
Well, that's the kind of thing that's going to hurt the system.
Right.
I mean, that's going to have her, because it's tough enough being a juror. A juror in this case, she gave up her life for 8 weeks.
Mhm.
So she gave, and I think she's got 4 children she takes care of, and her father had to come up from Brazil, and
And she has a
for her,
contract job where she would get one contract at a time doing some work. All that's out the window.
yeah. So she made a real sacrifice to be on this jury, and it's the American way. It's a wonderful system. At least I believe it's a wonderful system.
Yeah,
So I think it's really a shame if anybody would attack a juror just for doing their job.
that is something that should be of the utmost importance to everyone involved, every lawyer, every judge, every cop, every person whose life is affected by the criminal justice system. That should be something they really, really care about. And I'm interested to see how law enforcement and everybody up in Massachusetts in that area, how much do they care about this? Because they sure seem to care about some stuff. Do they care about this? Because this will affect every single one of their cases. If nobody wants to be a juror anymore, that's going to affect their cases. That's going to affect the DA's office. That's going to affect the DA, the judges, the lawyers, the criminal defense attorneys, everybody. That should affect them. Let's see how much they care about that, because that's one of the things I thought is most disgusting throughout this whole process is how people are deciding to react to and treat these jurors now because they disagree with them. When throughout the process, we all knew there were people that disagree and see this case differently, and they could be on the jury, and you never know what a jury's going to do. We talk about that the whole time. Yet when it comes to be true, people start losing their minds and their ethics, and there needs to be repercussions for that, in my opinion, so that we don't have people, that jurors feeling bullied to just convict everybody. Cops arrest them, prosecutors, you better prosecute them, and jurors, you better convict them. Who wants to live in that system? Not me, no thanks.
No, you're absolutely right. And
So
so
bad.
I hope that this is just cools down.
Yeah.
That things like that happen.
All right. What
Um,
next juror you want to talk about?
Lucky in the
Oh, you're still on juror number 11.
I'm still on 11, yeah, because she had
Got it.
so much more to say.
Yeah, go
And
ahead.
I thought was really key. In the first trial, I'm told the jurors did not like Lucky. Now, if I remember right, they
Some of
didn't
them
like.
felt like they didn't take his testimony as much into account because they didn't think he could be as credible, because Lally did a pretty good job of talking about maybe some inconsistencies or things he didn't see. And this was one of the things we talked about with Yannetti when he was on, was the difference in preparation that he did with Lucky Lawford from trial 1 to trial 2 was night and day. He was 100 times better in trial 2.
And he was a witness she specifically mentioned as a really important witness. She didn't think anything of the fact that he didn't see the dumpster. And so, she really thought he was a really good witness and a really important witness. And then La Sparta, am I saying that
La
right?
Posada, is that what you're talking about?
Posada, yes.
Posada,
The
yeah.
other ME, yes, loved her. Yeah, she thought she was wonderful. She thought she handled it really well, and that she really handled Brennan well. She liked Arca. She thought Arca was wonderful. And you know who else she liked? Again, as lawyers, we kind of, pass over stuff. The weatherman, the guy who talked about the weather. She thought that guy was key, that how much snow was on the ground. Remember, we talked about the fact that jurors are kind of investigators. When they go back there, they kind of do some investigation that you don't even think about. Well, the weather guy was really important. The amount of snow that was on the ground and how it was falling. She also talked about the hair. Remember the hair that managed to stay on the car. Well, she referred to it as the magic hair, and so
Which I think that's what Jackson called it, I'm pretty sure, in his closing argument.
So obviously the jury thought that hair was a joke. She, along with some other jurors, I can't remember specifically, but they talked about the fact that the taillight worked when it was being towed.
Right.
And that she thought that they saw too much red in that taillight, and that if it had been as destroyed as they saw in the Sally Port, you wouldn't have seen the red or the light. And so she focused in on that.
Which we knew the jurors were going to trust their own eyes when they looked at those pictures and videos and see what they saw, regardless of what a lawyer said they should see.
And then another thing she talked about was ring cameras. She said, everybody has a ring camera. It's all over the neighborhood. My ring camera doesn't just show my front door, but it shows my front yard. And so she was complaining that they didn't get the ring cameras from around the neighborhood to see, what happened and, what went on. So, she was very key on that. She talked about Welcher, and she said Welcher, she had high expectations for Welcher. Then it turns out that what he did was a preschool experiment.
Mhm.
So I thought that that was
Great.
a. And then Burgess. I remember you and I and your fans talked about Burgess and how important the fact that Burgess is lied about his having a bachelor's.
Mhm.
She thought that that was irrelevant.
Mhm.
She said Burgess had the experience necessary to give that opinion. And the fact that he did or didn't have a bachelor's degree did not detract from the fact that he had the necessary experience to give that result and to give those answers. So that's all she cared about, was they established Burgess's experience to be able to do what he did. She found Jackson trustworthy, but she thought, this shows how things change during a trial. At the beginning of the trial, she said she looked over and thought that Karen Reed had something to hide.
Mhm.
That was her initial impression of Karen Reed. It changed during the course of the trial. And then she thought, and remember we talked about this earlier when we were talking about the fact that when you have women jurors, women experts, that they kind of identify with each other. They
Mhm.
kind of look. Well, she was upset by how rude Brennan was to Russell. She thought that that was really uncalled for, and she really was upset when Brennan tried to infer that Russell was old.
Mhm.
And that's why, I don't know if you remember that question. I do, because I remember Russell had a great comeback was, "Oh, come on." That
No, she
was,
was like, "Oh."
yeah,
And then she was like disappointed. She had like a disappointed look on her face. Like,
yeah,
you really went there?
yeah. So she really got into that,
Mhm.
and that really bothered her. The other thing, again, this was a great interview. Law students and new trial lawyers should listen to this interview. The other thing she talked about was too many Commonwealth objections. Now, a lot of times we as lawyers will say to ourselves, don't want to make too many objections because, we'll look like we're hiding something, or, that kind of stuff. And we'll say it to ourselves, but sometimes we don't have any real concrete proof that that's really true. Well, it's true. She really was bothered by how many Commonwealth objections. There were so many objections that it was hard for her to follow Russell, she said. And
Yeah.
then, go ahead.
So there's two things about that. Number one, that's what's so frustrating about a bad judge, because if the judge continues to let a lawyer do something, you feel like you have to continue to object, which is frustrating. Number one. Number two, it can also work on the flip side. Brennan probably thought he just kept winning, so he just kept objecting because he was winning all these objections and thought a jury would like it, and it backfired, at least with this one juror. And so the Burgess thing I was going to say, and some of that was not necessarily as consistent through every juror. There were some jurors that did discredit Burgess because he lied about or whatever, his resume stuff. So I do think that can kind of go both ways depending on the juror. But for her, that's what she said.
Okay. And then she said that she also started to notice, not till the end of the trial, how the judge was sustaining all of the Commonwealth's objections and overruling all the defense objections. Now, again, she's a lawyer from Brazil, so maybe she was more sensitive to it. But she really started to notice that, and that really bothered her, because they asked her about the judge being biased, and she really didn't think so. She said the judge was really nice to her,
Mhm.
nice to the jury, which we know that judges are very nice to jurors.
That's normal. Yeah.
Yes, but she started to notice at the end of the trial the disparity between the sustained and overruled objections by the defense versus the Commonwealth.
Mhm.
So I thought that she really was a wealth of information for educating people about what jurors are looking for, what they see, and how they view things more different than how we view them.
Mhm. Yeah, no,
Oh,
she was a great resource for all of us to learn from, frankly, that try cases like this. Although I do think she's a bit of an unusual juror. But if you are going to have a lawyer on the jury, this makes sense, right? I was talking about the lawyer we had on the jury in our federal trial years ago. I don't know if you even remember, but we picked a lawyer. He was pissed about it. I actually know who he is now, but we picked a lawyer. He was pissed about it. He ended up getting excused halfway through because he knew one of the witnesses, but he was a pre-suit non-litigator plaintiff's personal injury lawyer, so we didn't care. It was a federal criminal case, so he would have been a fine juror for us in that case. And we had an entrapment defense, an affirmative defense. So sometimes having a lawyer to understand and help, walk through those elements, we thought would be good when we picked that juror. But that's the only lawyer I can remember ever having on a jury. I did have your friend's paralegal on my civil jury recently, where we got a great verdict. Very happy with that. But she was a criminal paralegal. Never did any personal injury or anything like that. Some of her questions or some of her answers to questions in jury selection scared me a little bit. But overall, she did a great job. But so yeah, this is the type of lawyer, right? You're not going to have a prosecutor be on this jury, but it's like a lawyer trained in a different country. So she's smart and she understands the law, but maybe not exactly, how it works in the American criminal justice system.
Right.
All right. Well, who's next?
Well, we have one juror that, again, the other jurors are much briefer than these. But there's one juror that's they have her in the dark and the shadows, and I think that they might have manipulated her voice. And she gave just a short interview, and the only real thing that came out of her was they heard the cheers when they're not guilty. Of course, we heard the cheers when the not guilty came out. And then how they used a poster board to write down the definitions of the crimes, and that they went through the definitions word by word of each crime one at a time. And
which is what we assumed they would do, because that can be complicated, especially with that verdict form. So you have them side by side. Is she the one that also talked about it? They used a whiteboard or a...
Yeah, two. She was the only one of the only. So I think there were two that did. Yes, she did too. Yeah,
that's cool too. I think that's cool way to do it, and fun. And you're taking it seriously. Let's do it. Let's break it down. Let's use the resources we have. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Then we can go to juror 12, which is a Miss Jimenez. She was leaning toward guilty. She was the one, because they talked about, some of the jurors talked about, basically, as we know, there are three camps. There are the ones that at the very beginning, the ones that thought she was guilty, the ones that didn't know, and the ones that thought she was not guilty. And that there actually were three camps when they started their deliberations. So she was one of the ones that were leaning toward guilty when they started the deliberations. She also, interesting thing that I kind of noticed, and I don't know if you noticed this because you looked at other interviews they did. Karen Reed's statements didn't seem to have a great impact on their decision.
If I had to guess, right? If I had to guess, which it's impossible for somebody to know this while it's happening. My guess is part of that is because of how early most of them came out. And everything that happened afterwards, and the defense's entire case in chief being so strong, I think it was smart of them to not try to add context, which a lot of people thought that they would. Just kind of keep them in the background, keep them in the beginning of the case. And once the jurors started to make up their mind, Hank Brennan bringing them up again in closing argument just wasn't going to be enough to win the day alone. And we said that all along. The only way they win is if they take those statements as confessions and they're going to convict her from that. If they don't, then the statements aren't that important, right? They are the best evidence the Commonwealth had, and the defense's case would have been even better without them. I still stand by that. But it totally makes sense. If you're going to say not guilty, you don't think those statements are that important. You can't. Right. You can't think she was confessing and then say not guilty.
All right. So it was ego, but it was interesting that they didn't really take a lot of time discussing her statements. They were in there for
no collision. There was no collision. No, the injuries don't match. The car doesn't match. I mean, it's as simple as that. And they did. It's great. The first jury thought a bunch of stuff was distractors that, I happen to think is some of the most important evidence. This time, it seems like the jury really did avoid the distractors, the things that were not important, because if there was no accident, there's no crime here.
Right.
At least, unless besides the OUI.
Right. Then there was juror number 4, Jason, no last name. Again, he was big on that tail light working like we talked about before. And he also talked about how there were 3 camps when they started. He talked about holes in the investigation, which again was key to everybody, was the fact that the investigation was sloppy, lazy. You had various adjectives used by the jurors, but they all keyed in on what a horrible investigation it was. And Jason honed in on no search of the house. he also felt that that was really important. He doesn't understand how it's possible that it didn't search the house. So
Yeah.
those are the keys, I think.
And I think it's cool to hear from the different jurors because there are definitely some similarities that they all agreed on, but then there's probably some differences. Like when you go beneath the surface, or you have when you talk about, I don't know, religious circles or maybe families or relationships, like you have certain cores that everybody has to agree on. Then when you start to go outside, it's okay if you disagree on this. It's okay if you disagree on that. It's okay. Maybe even Americans, feel the certain way. We should all agree on something. Then we can disagree a little bit about this, a little bit about this, but it's okay. We're all, for the country. And they all seem to agree the investigation was woefully short. And all the ones that came out and spoke, I feel like, seem to agree they didn't prove a collision. And those are the core things you have to believe. Now, which witness was good or bad? Did Burgess's resume really hurt that much? Did Karen Reed's statements matter that much? You may disagree on that, but it's not a core enough issue to make you change your verdict on the three top verdicts. And that, I think, was an interesting thing to hear. The subtle differences that they all definitely had with their own experiences and differences in backgrounds and different brains, but the core issues, they were all seemingly in lockstep by the end of all of this, which obviously is how you get to a unanimous verdict.
I think you said, and I think you got it from third hand because obviously we couldn't see them, that it was a relatively young jury.
That's what everybody said. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at these, look at the people the jurors that are speaking,
Mm-hmm.
they are relatively young,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that also made a difference. They also apparently were a pretty mature group because the foreman said, again, they had these disagreements. They were in there for 22 hours arguing. Said that they all were friends, that they really had a friendship going between these jurors. My guess is, and this happens pretty common on cases like this, you're going to see these jurors get together again in the future. They're going to get together to have lunch or have a dinner on the anniversary of the verdict. Those kind of things happen on trials like this. I bet you end up seeing that.
And I think a contentious jury that's able to come to a decision and a verdict has to be friends. I think the last time when it was a hung jury, you heard about some bullying and some anger and maybe people that didn't necessarily like each other as much. Those
Right.
are the ones that usually end up that way. Or one juror everybody hates that refuses to even talk or discuss their differences or tries to understand the other person's side. Those are the ones that end in a hung jury and are less surprising. Okay, next let's get to let's knock out the witnesses here. So the Alberts,
Okay, go ahead. Witnesses, go ahead.
the Alberts and the McCabe's and Proctor, they all make statements and come out and make statements. A lot of them didn't even testify in the trial. First off, what did you think about the fact that they decided to make statements, especially Proctor? His statements were being released on like 2020 or whatever, the night of the verdict. Like that was wild. What did you think about that?
Well, Proctor, I mean, he said some stupid things during the course. Number one, he would not have changed his investigation. I mean, nothing different. He would have, even during the course of the interview, they point some things out to him. He says, "Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know about this phone call."
Yeah.
But then after they point out all the things he didn't know, they get back to the question, and he says the same thing. I would not have changed my investigation. So how absurd was that?
And then when he did say, yeah, I would have checked some of the cars or maybe interviewed some of the witnesses just to say I did it. It's like,
Right. Yeah.
that's the problem, sir. That's what I'm saying. You can't convince me you put this guy on the stand and it goes any better for the Commonwealth. Like this guy is a walking problem for law enforcement and the Commonwealth. Anytime he opens his mouth or fires off a text message, it's just going to make him look worse. Like it has not gone well from him from the jump. And then to do this was such a weird move, such a strange, twisted move to decide to have these filmed, plan it out, and have it released on the day of the verdict is so strange to me.
And he defends the text messages too, which how absurd. There's no defense for those text messages. You're a professional law enforcement. There's no defense for those text messages. You should, as a human being, you should never say the kind of stuff that he's saying on those text, let alone distribute it to your friends who are also in law enforcement, including your supervisor. So it goes, oh, I was emotional. I have kids too. And there's no excuse for those text messages. So that would have gone, the jury would have really been bummed.
With his logic, it's like, yeah, she's somebody's kid. right?
Yeah.
She has a family, she has friends, and you're talking about her like that. It just nothing makes sense. That any defense of those text messages besides I'm an a-hole, I'm a jerk, and I was firing off texts I shouldn't have. That's really it.
Right.
That's the only explanation.
And then what's his future? Well, I think his future in law enforcement is pretty over.
He said he's going to
Uh,
appeal it, but
what?
he said he's going to appeal the decision.
I know, but the problem you got is whenever now he's on a case, I think Brady is going to require. I think you're letting me know about Brady. It means that any evidence that is good for the defense has to be disclosed to the defense that the state knows. The
Like
state is
impeaching a
always
cop.
going to have to disclose. Excuse me?
Like impeaching a cop.
Right. The state is always going to have to disclose Proctor's issues to any defense lawyer on any case that Proctor is on. So he's going to have Brady disclosures now for the rest of his life. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to go well for him for law enforcement in the future.
Yeah, I agree. All right. What about the Alberts and the McCabe's and the fact that they did the interview together? Number one. Number two, that Brian Higgins wasn't there. And what did you think about it?
Well, first off, they had righteous indignation. I mean, they were upset that they were not called as witnesses in order to convict Karen Reed. They were upset about that. They were upset because no one took their DNA in order to compare it to anything that was going on. Uh, they were upset because they weren't able to explain. Albert wasn't able to explain why he didn't come out of his house at the time. They were upset. Albert's wife said, "Oh, she woke me up out of a deep sleep." Well, we've got a phone call. If I remember right, there's a phone call that happened before that where Mrs. McCabe called her sister at the house for 38 seconds or something before she got there. They were, they just, again, they were, another thing that Albert said was, "What do you mean O'Keefe's out there? What was he doing here?" Well, we all know he invited O'Keefe over for a party.
Mm-hmm.
So they got to say all these things. Nobody challenged what they said. They weren't up for cross-examination. So it was easy for them to make these statements there in the interview room on one-sided, and it would have been a lot different story if it was in a trial and they were being cross-examined. So, and again, I didn't watch the first trial, but they testified in that first trial. I just don't think it would have. I just don't think they would have benefited by testifying. But their interviews I thought were ridiculous. I did. As ridiculous as Proctor's.
It's just not a good look, especially for people that are saying they're being intimidated and have all this negative media attention and all this coverage, and it's affecting their lives negatively, which could all very well be true. But if that is true, why would you do this? Seek more attention, come out and make these statements. Wouldn't you hope it's over? The trial's over. Hope everybody moves on. You didn't push your way on to testify. You didn't force the Commonwealth to call you to the stand. Like, try to move on with it and have it not affect your life anymore. It was just such a weird move by all these witnesses to come out and give these statements. Okay, next, let's get to the lawyers. First off, what are your thoughts on lawyers taking a victory lap, doing all these interviews, talking about, everybody telling them what a great job they did, myself included. What do you think about that? Any negativity from lawyers going and giving those interviews? Any issues with that after a big win like this? We'll focus on the defense lawyers first, and then we'll talk about the prosecutor.
Well, I mean, let's face it. To the victors belong the spoils.
Exactly.
I mean, you win a case. I mean, who can question any of your decisions, any of your strategies? You won. So go on and say, look, hey, here I am, and it was a wonderful trial, and everything went really well, and the system was against us, but we won anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see anything wrong with it, and I also think it's a legitimate marketing tool for a lawyer when they win a big case like this, because you go seven, you in a week, people aren't going to remember their names. So they might as well use
they
it.
probably will, but I get what you're saying. Eventually, just like Johnny Depp, nobody's talking about the Johnny Depp case and lawyers so much anymore. There's going to be a new case. There's going to be everybody remembers, right? You still remember, but it is a quick news cycle, as they say. But I do think that this is going to last and be a big deal for a long time. But then on the flip side, a prosecutor, right? Prosecutors supposed to be careful even after big wins, but after big losses, sometimes it can be very difficult. Michael Morrissey, the DA, comes out and says the jury has spoken, something to that effect. And then Hank Brennan gives a much longer statement. What did you think about the prosecutor's statement in this case?
Well, Brennan, as I said earlier, Brennan was disappointed in me during the defense case. He was taking cheap shots. He was just doing things that I really didn't expect him to do, of a lawyer of his caliber, to do in the defense cross-examination in the case. So he was disappointing me. But I thought he would do better now. The verdict's done. I really had some hopes because right after the verdict, he approached the bench and did not ask for anything other than the standard
Right.
sentence for Karen Reed, which was the right thing to do. And we all said it, that was the gentlemanly thing to do. And so afterwards, as a prosecutor, you're the minister of justice. And I realized that he was a contract prosecutor, that they hired him to do this. But he was still acting as a minister of justice, which means you don't care what the verdict is. Because the verdict, all you're doing is presenting the case. The verdict comes out, then everything's right in the world because it's the jury's verdict.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not supposed to care about the verdict. It's obvious that he really cared way too much about the verdict in this
I mean, you
case.
care about the victims and getting justice for the victims, so you do
Right.
care about it. But it is different. Like, that's the just verdict. You live with it. You realize that's a possibility, and it just kind of is what it is. And you're right. His actions in the sentencing would have led you to believe maybe he was going to say something like Morrissey did. Frankly, give Morrissey a little credit. The jury has spoken. That's all you really need to say.
Right.
But he said
And
a lot
so,
more. So what stuck out to you about what he said?
well, what stuck out to me was, number one, he came out with basically Karen Reed is the one and only person who committed this heinous crime. I looked at the evidence, and there's no doubt she is the only one. Everything focused on her. Everything points to her. It's her. I don't care what the jury says. I'm saying it's her. And that's a ridiculous thing to say after the jury's, because the jury's heard all the evidence and they came up with a verdict. So how can you say that now? I mean, you can say, yes, I had probable cause to believe that she was the one that did it, but the jury did not find it beyond a reasonable doubt, something like that. So that kind of statement, I think, demeans the minister of justice role that he was playing, criticizing the jury's verdict and still maintaining that she's guilty. The other thing is, there's two parts to actually his statement. That's the first part, which I thought was really pretty bad. The second part, which wasn't as bad, was talking about that you shouldn't have a jury system that has a lot of intimidation and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with that, witnesses should not be intimidated. If you're a witness, you should be able to walk down the street without someone coming up to you and calling you names or threatening you, or people calling you on the phone saying, that you're lying and you're, those kinds of accusations. So part two, I didn't mind too much. Part one, basically attacking the jury system, the jury verdict, and the correctness of a jury verdict. I found a lot of problems with that.
Yeah, but so a couple of things that I thought of there too. That should apply to the jurors too, right? And why didn't he say
Yes.
anything about that? Which he didn't. In fact, he instead disagreed and added fuel to the fire for anybody that wants to go after those jurors based on what he said, that they screwed up
Yeah.
because they didn't get the one and only person who did it.
And he didn't thank him. He didn't thank him.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. So that I find majorly problematic. And then number two, going back to what the Alberts and the McCabe said, one of their big statements was, you better think twice if you want to be a witness in a case, which I just found preposterous. And for people that are law enforcement officers or former law enforcement officers to say things like that, knowing how important witnesses are, and we basically can't solve any crime without a witness. So are you saying because you feel like you got intimidated in this case, which is, you're right, you can say that you got intimidated. There are some charges out there, whether or not they're going to stick, who knows? But regardless of what happened to you in this case, you're telling people that they should really think twice about being witnesses because what? Like, do we not care about catching the bad guys? Do we not care about justice being served? Do we not care about protecting your fellow man and your society? Like, that was such a weird statement to me, and a bad statement by them.
Yeah.
And
Well,
this kind of feeds into it, what Brennan's saying. Like, do what's right. there may be negative repercussions in doing what's right. It's not going to stop us from doing what's right.
Well, I tell you, and it's sad to say, but no matter what side you're on, there's always a couple wackos
Yeah, of course.
that are going to be extreme.
Hmm.
And hopefully law enforcement can take care of that. But you can't, because of those couple wackos, you can't let the whole system crumble
Right.
and fall
Every
apart.
case is going to have stuff like that where there's people you
Right.
disagree with, threats coming. I don't care what cases. I mean, there was some talk about that in the P. Diddy case as well, and the Johnny Depp case. And every case, there are witnesses potentially being influenced or intimidated, or somebody saying something they don't like, or whatever it may be. That shouldn't stop people from being witnesses. I've felt the need to say that every time we talk about that.
Right.
Okay, so then what did you think about Jackson's lambasting that came as a response to Hank Brennan's statement, where he just took every shot you could possibly take in a written statement?
Well, it's obvious to me, and we've also heard that Jackson's given some interviews. Um, Jackson and Brennan aren't going to go out to dinner together, and so Jackson is very hot about this. He still has, when you have a trial, there's adrenaline, and I think he's still pretty pumped up from what I can hear in the way he's talking. He's still
Oh,
very pumped about this trial. So he's, he shamed. He said Brennan shamed to discredit the jury, and that was what his statement was designed to do. And he said that it was prosecutorial ethics. Now I'm not sure what he means, because I don't know if I know of and I've been an assistant state attorney and assistant federal prosecutor. I don't know what ethics this might have violated, but I think it violated good conduct at the very least, by him saying this and not just thanking the jury for their service. Again, 8 weeks. Do you know what that does to a person's life, especially these younger people? They're not retired. To cut their life out for 8 weeks, and not to thank them for a hard work and for the job that they did. So I think that Jackson was a little excited about what he said. Let me see if I got any other notes on it.
you can go into his other interview with Howie Carr or
Okay.
Alessi and Yannetti video or interviews. Just what did you think of some of the comments that we heard from the defense team that's spoken so far?
Well, I think that Yannetti and Alisi or
Alessi.
Alessi, and Alessi, I think that they have been very judicious, is a good word to say, in their comments. I think they've been excellent interviews. They haven't really attacked anybody. I think, other than legal attacks,
Mhm.
but not personal attacks on anybody. So I think they've done a good job. Um, Jackson has gotten pretty fired up, and I think that he was very fired up in this interview. He said that the prosecutors did not want a fair trial, and they didn't want the jury to hear the evidence. Now, I got to be honest with you, as a defense lawyer, I always claim that. I always claim that the prosecutors don't want the jury to hear the evidence. That's not an unusual claim by the defense, and that it was um, the court was theater. Well, I think that I even said that a couple of times in this. It is theater, and that you do have to put on a show. He talked about the Commonwealth's. I think he said 49 straight sustained objections. Now I don't know who was keeping count, but
People online.
oh, they were really
Oh yeah, big time.
49 straight objections. And one of his key statements was, "We won despite the process." And that was an important statement, because he believed the judge was against him. He believed I guess, I don't think at least at the end, the media was not against him, although some of the media certainly was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously the prosecution, he felt only cared about, and this is the kind of, I'm reading into it, but what Brennan really cared about is protecting the police rather than anything else. He was trying to protect the police from all the bad things that people were saying about them. I don't know if he was really doing that. The other thing he talked about was the outrageous nature of keeping the FBI, the fact the FBI hired ARCA, keeping that out. That really bothered him. He thought that was one of the worst decisions.
Well, it wasn't just the decision, but it was how she was allowing them to use it. she was allowing them to use it as a sword and a shield. Not just that they kept it out, but then it was also looking like something nefarious on the defense's side, which was not true. That
One of
was
the
the
things,
big issue.
going backtrack, one of the things that Karen Reed's father said was that Jackson came up to him before the verdict and told him that we got this.
Mhm.
So he was pretty darn
Well,
confident.
especially after the jury questions. Yeah, I would be
Yeah,
confident too. But yeah, I think
yeah,
Yannetti and Alessi said they've never had a trial where they felt like they won every single witness and were confident from the beginning to the end, never felt like they had a bad day or a bad witness. That's what they said, which is pretty wild. I've never had a trial like that.
neither have I.
Yeah.
He told Karen that to get ready for being convicted of the OUI.
Mm-hmm.
He said that he did. He told her that, and that
It was by design or something, he said.
one of the things that Jackson did say was he's not worried about the prosecutor because he can beat most any prosecutor.
With his hands tied behind his back. That's
His hands tied behind his back. I thought that was a little grandiose. I mean,
he's got a little bit of that in him. Yeah.
I'll give him the adrenaline again.
Give me a break. He just won one of the biggest trials of all time. Like, whatever. If you're gonna shoot your shot, he's on a hot streak right now, on a heater.
He said that Karen Reed was one of the best lawyers he's ever known.
That was good too.
Very involved in the case. One of the things, I don't know I think you know this, but that this week, I guess they're called the select board, which is the kind of like the city commission, has appointed a new interim chief of police in Canton until they hire a new one. So apparently they had a very contentious select board meeting this week.
People have sent it to me. I haven't had a chance to watch it, but people
apparently very contentious. People showing up and complaining about law enforcement in Canton, which they certainly should complain about law enforcement in Canton. Let's see. Those are the highlights that I noted in Jackson. But he was very aggressive. I think in the interview, he's aggressive toward the judge and aggressive toward Brennan in the interview.
I think he's going to just take haymakers left and right, and I don't blame him. I mean, it's like, now's the time. You won. He's in LA, right? He's not practicing in Boston. I mean, he could have more cases there, but right. Yeah, I mean, he was the one that got personally attacked the most by the judge and the media. I feel like he was the one that they were saying basically was violating Rule 14 and doing things that were unethical and the signal stuff. And he was the one getting most of those accusations thrown his way. So, hey, you won. Like you said, the victor goes to spoils. Go do your thing now. Go say what you want to say. Again, being ethical and not crossing any lines. But I think he has a right to be angry and frustrated and a right to be like, I won. Now it's my time to talk about it. You guys all look at me. I was right. I told you this is how it was going to go, and this is how it went. So I expect more of that from him in some medium. I'm sure there's a book or movie or TV deal or something at this point they're all working on. But there's another video that like everybody has sent me. I don't know for sure what to take from it. We'll watch it together. Just to give you like a little background. Everybody is saying that Judge Cannone flew to, I think, New Orleans or something, and some kids went up and said, hey, are you the judge from this case? Are you Judge Cannone? And she says something like, no, that was my sister. And they're like, oh, you must be twins, something like that. And everybody's now just crushing her for quote unquote lying. I was told you could see her in the video. You can't. You can only see her legs unless there's another video where you can see her face. So I don't know for a fact that this is Judge Cannone. It sounds like her. Everybody seems to confirm it is her. It's very likely that it's not her and this is just a spoof or whatever, but we'll watch it. And then I do want to ask you about how judges deal with high-profile cases after the verdict is done, and what you would think about it. But, I mean, this is really embarrassing if it's true that she did lie, that this was her, as opposed to just avoid answering questions. So let's take a listen. So they start out by saying, are you the judge from the Karen Reed trial? The audio is boosted as much as it can be.
It's your sister?
Yes.
Oh my God. Are you serious? That's your sister?
Yes.
You look so much alike.
That's amazing. That's so cool. I'll tell her.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Are you guys twins?
No.
You guys look really
You look so much alike.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Have a good flight.
So She says, "Are you guys twins?" That's my sister. Okay, I'll tell her. That's what she says. I'll tell her. It's just so funny. So what do you think about judges? How do judges deal with this? Should they make comments? If they do make comments, when is it appropriate? When is it not? What are your thoughts there?
Judges shouldn't make any comment at all. It should be just like the prosecutors they just walk away from the trial. It's over. You move on to the next one. And that's what the judges should do. They should make no comment. They should say nothing, and they should just keep doing their job. What good does it do? Tell me what benefit there is to a judge making a comment about a high-profile trial. There's no benefit to it. There's no benefit to the system. There's no benefit to the public. So keep your mouth shut. Move on to your next case. And again, as we all know, as time goes on, people forget. So unless you continue to make it a news item.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just keep your mouth shut, it'll go away.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely the way to go. Some judges don't do that, but maybe when you retire, you can talk about it some more as a judge. But now is not the time probably to talk about it. All right. Anything else from any of the interviews? Anything that we saw? Anything else we need to recap or talk about before we go?
Nope. I think that's good. I mean, like I said, still so much is happening and still so much is going on.
It's true. And this will probably be the last Karen Reed video we do for a while until the book deal, movie, show, whatever comes out. We may talk about that some more, but it's been a wild ride. We're done. We got to figure out what you're going to jump on next. We've got Koberger and Adelson and, a bunch of trials happening at the same time. YNW Melly coming up, Corey Richin. So you have to take a look, see which one interests you. And we'll have to get on and do kind of weekly recaps again for one of these trials coming up, because there's going to be, maybe we'll do one that I'm not following as much so we can still talk about it because so many are happening at the same time. But it's all we got. Another episode in the books. Make sure you guys hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed. If you're watching on any podcast, give us a 5-star review. But till next time, we are out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a pase you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.